Hello interwebs, I hope you are all doing well. Apologies in advance for this video being a slightly different style than my usual because I was actually filming an entirely different video today, so all of my professional lighting and equipment is actually set up in an entirely other room. But an event happened today that you can kind of see indicated on the screen here that I felt a need and an urgency to discuss because I think while ultimately it's not the most important topic going on today, I think it underscores and highlights a lot of the themes and discussions that we've been having on this channel, namely surrounding how the gender critical / TERF movement that is so perniciously targeting the transgender community is being wielded and supported by far-right and totalitarian movements in order to bolster their own sort of harmful goals. And then on top of that, also these ideas of cancel culture and how cancel culture is being wielded as a way to flatten and trivialize really important discussions surrounding harm done to communities, as well as dismiss larger context and discussions that need to be had surrounding the marginalization of certain groups, in this case trans people, but as we sort of extrapolate it out into much larger discussions, how cancel culture is just used to sort of flatten these discussions in a way that ultimately does no one any good. And so I honestly wanted to talk about it. So what am I talking about? Well, for those of you who hadn't heard, Vladimir Putin, who is currently the leader of Russia and is leading an invasion of the Ukraine in a very imperialist sort of intention to try to expand Russian influence and to just sort of like bolster his own legacy as a Russian leader who expanded Russia. Again, very imperialist sort of goals that Putin is sort of pushing here. Today, he came out and had a statement where he said, J.K. Rowling has recently been canceled because she did not please the fans of so-called gender freedoms, quote-unquote gender freedoms. And then he went on to say, today, they meaning sort of like the United States and other countries that are pushing back against his invasion of Ukraine, said they are trying to cancel a whole 1,000-year-old country, our people. I am talking about the increasing discrimination of everything related to Russia, about this trend which is unfolding in a number of Western states. So I found this comment to be vastly interesting for a number of reasons. I mean, number one, we already see what I was talking about just a moment ago of using cancel culture to trivialize really important discussions going on here. Like, Putin is basically saying like, oh, they're trying to cancel Russia, all the sanctions and things that have been sort of targeted at Russia because of his invasion of Ukraine. And it's like, no, this is not just about trying to cancel Russia, Putin. A lot of these sanctions and sort of targeted effects at Russia, whether you agree with some of them or not, or how they've been enacted or not, are being done in a way to try to push back in as best a way as we can with given sort of legalese around like NATO and things like that, to stop and sort of push back against Russia's imperialist invasion of Ukraine. But by framing it in this way of like, it's just cancel culture, it just flattens the entire discussion to just like trolls on Twitter and just like trying to attack this wonderful nationalistic idea of Russia. And I know that that's sort of like very obvious and evident. Like that's a very overtly obvious way to discuss this, but I think it also goes back to how we talk about cancel culture just in general. Like I've talked about on this channel, when we talk about like cancel culture of someone like Dave Chappelle or J.K. Rowling or wherever cancel culture rhetoric is often used, it is used as a flattening mechanism. It's meant to sort of say like, oh, well, I'm not going to listen to the criticism that people have against me because I'm going to equate all the criticism against me to the like most disingenuous views. Sort of saying like, oh, all the people that are attacking me are like harassing me. They're trying to hurt me. They're sending me death threats. And yes, while there are certainly those people, like I have talked about numerous times on this channel, that J.K. Rowling, for example, has received things like death threats, has received harassment, and that is categorically wrong. To equate all criticism of her just to that ultimately trivializes a lot of the harm that she has done and the actual criticism that is being had against her and sort of wielded to the people that ultimately support her in order to frame everyone that is against her as just misogynistic, as just harmful. And so it's just a way to flatten these all criticisms in order to play towards people that already support you, to try and showcase that, like, oh, we are actually the good ones and everyone against me is bad. And it sort of eliminates nuance in a very binarized way. Now, and so again, we're talking about Putin here. We're talking about actual war. So I don't mean to necessarily compare war to J.K. Rowling situations specifically, or like cancel culture narratives that are like wielded against celebrities. But the reason that I bring that up is, again, Putin's use of this cancel culture narrative just highlights in an extreme way that I hope makes the sort of dynamics that I've been discussing very evident, how cancel culture is just used to trivialize and flatten these things, because you can't trivialize something as like cancel culture when we're talking about literal war and invasion in Ukraine to further imperialist goals. And so I think that is one element of this that I wanted to at least touch upon. But the other thing that I wish to connect this with, which Putin himself connected it to, was his use of connecting like the way that he is quote unquote being canceled to how Rowling is being canceled quote unquote for opposing gender ideology. And I think that goes back to something that I was talking about a few months ago in my video where I was talking about the TERF to fascist pipeline, and how ultimately a lot of gender critical and TERF rhetoric that is being wielded by someone like Rowling, but we also see with things like the LGBT Alliance in the UK and many TERF movements in the United States and elsewhere, are ultimately there to prop up right-wing and alt-right and even totalitarian movements. We will often see many totalitarian and alt-right and right-wing groups wield the rhetoric of gender-critical feminists in order to try to prop up their own movements and own sort of goals. Like, for example, here in the United States, we have seen a large swath and increasing of anti-transgender legislation here, like the things that we've seen in Texas and Idaho, sort of targeting trans healthcare bills. And a lot of those bills are utilizing and weaponizing the rhetoric of gender-critical movements, like saying things like, detransitioners are such a detransitioner trans people are being harmed and they're trying to push people into having surgeries before they're ready, and so we need to ban all transgender healthcare in order to protect the children. And I've talked about in other videos how the detransition narrative has been wielded by gender critical TERF groups in order to sort of say oh, trans people are harming your children, when again we know that detransitioners categorically are most likely not detransitioning because they are regretting transition, but because they face stigmatization or discrimination for being trans, and so detransition for helping themselves. And then also, even if you do want to talk about the detransitioners who do regret transition, which does happen, the way to stop that is not to ban all trans-affirming healthcare, but to help give more trans-affirming healthcare and give more access to tools and education to doctors and therapists in order to prevent those things from happening, which would also benefit trans people who do wish to transition as well. But all that's being done in ultimate service to just vilify trans people and also in order to bolster their bases. So a lot of these Republican and conservative lawmakers in the United States are using these narratives in order to bolster their bases. Like, oh, think about the transes, vote for us because we'll stop the transes from harming your children. And we ignore sort of the more harmful movements that many conservatives and right-wing folks are part of and pushing. And we sort of ignore those things in service of like the culture war things being wielded against trans people. And so Putin here quite literally is doing that on a global scale, comparing Rowling's cancellation to his cancellation, quote unquote, and how he's wielding this sort of gender critical ideology, the sort of auspices of it, in order to just sort of like bolster his own legitimacy and claim to like just flatten all of these ideas and sort of distract and be like, look, this is just like Rowling. And it also goes to speak to how many of these movements ultimately do this in order to reinforce a lot of gendered roles. You see, again, like a lot of gender critical TERF movements are ultimately there to they bolster ultimately a lot of, traditional feminine roles for women. I mean, you also see like runoff of this with things like when you talk about trans people being attacked and harassed for appearing trans, how many butch presenting or mask presenting cisgender women will also face same stigmatization, even though they are not trans at all. I mean, there was a thread that went viral on Reddit a few days ago about a person she's a, cisgender woman, identifies as a woman her entire life, born a woman, all that stuff, born to sign female at birth, but she faced a lot of harassment because people perceived her as being trans because she was more butch presenting. And ultimately all this goes to push people into more traditionalist roles, which many right-wing groups support. I mean, we see things like the Proud Boys, which are a right-wing group and a right-wing terrorist organization in the United States, which ultimately do support, like, and the wonderful Renegade Cut, a YouTuber, did a great video on this, support more traditionalist roles for women within their very harmful worldview and very far-right worldview. They support and have fought alongside many gender-critical women at protests because they ultimately know that it's in service of forcing this sort of traditional view of femininity as subservient and sort of below men in a patriarchal structure. And so you see this sort of like, protect the women, protect the like upper-class white privileged woman like Rowling in order to sort of like wield these sort of right-wing movements. And again, I know that this is me sort of talking about something big like the invasion of Ukraine and Putin to discuss these sort of things, but I think it's really ultimately the reason that I want to do that is because I feel like ultimately, while this is sort of a small scale thing to discuss within the context of Ukraine, I think that this right here, Putin's utilizing of these narratives, ultimately kind of highlights how these things are being utilized. And even going back to the cancel culture narrative, right? Rowling herself uses that sort of same rhetoric as well. She uses that sort of rhetoric to say like, oh, all people criticizing me are misogynistic harassers. And it just speaks to the danger of a lot of these gender critical movements, because we talk about gender critical movements and how they only harm trans people, like only in that context about how J.K. Rowling herself is attacking and harming trans people, and she is doing that. But ultimately, it also speaks to how these gender-critical movements are being wielded by much more larger and nefarious movements like totalitarianism. And Judith Butler did a great article in The Guardian a few months ago that discussed this, how groups in like Germany and Poland, totalitarian far-right movements in Germany and Poland, are also wielding gender-critical rhetoric in order to push their movements as well. And we also start to see this more and more with J.K. Rowling beginning to be aligned more with far-right movements, even though she herself would not do so, would not overtly think so. I mean, she even herself here is like pushing back against Putin's words and utilizing of her cancel culture narrative. Like this was a tweet that she put out sort of pushing back against him. But what she doesn't realize is while she's like understanding that her support, that she doesn't support someone like Putin, she's not really connecting the dots that her ideology is ultimately supporting things that he is saying. I mean, Richard Spencer, for example, is a literal Nazi. He is a literal Nazi leader. He retweeted J.K. Rowling. Ben Shapiro, who is a right-wing conservative talk show host, who many people may know, also was supporting J.K. Rowling. And I don't think she ultimately understands that her rhetoric is ultimately furthering these very dangerous movements. And the reason that is the case is because she has so framed, and this is what TERF gender critical radicalization does, is it reframes your entire concern less about these larger issues and reframes it solely on trans people. Like as you've seen with J.K. Rowling, and this happens with so many gender critical people, her rhetoric has become more and more and more and more and more focused on just transgender people. Look at her timeline, look at her Twitter, and you'll be able to see it is timeline. What am I, Facebook? Anyways, you look at her Twitter account, and you see that it has become more and more focused on just talking about trans people because it has reframed transness as the ultimate threat to her womanhood. That is not the case. The truth is it's not cisgender women versus trans women. It's about how all women need to push back against these systems of patriarchal control because we ultimately have a lot more in common than we have against each other. But because these TERF gender critical radicalization pipelines have reframed the narrative of transness is the biggest threat to her, that's ultimately what she's become more and more focused on. And so she's willing to align herself with right-wing movements in order to attack trans people, because that's what she sees now and what has been reframed in her mind by this further and further radicalization as the biggest threat to her. And this is something we see consistently and constantly with so many gender critical movements. I mean, the WOLF, the LGB Alliance, two gender critical groups in the US and the United States, have worked with things like the Heritage Foundation to attack transgender rights. The Heritage Foundation being a group that has explicitly targeted women's rights to abortion in the United States, for example. I mean, the WOLF, which is a gender critical group, literally has an article that they posted on their site about why they align themselves with right-wing movements, and they literally say, like, well, they don't necessarily stand for all of our beliefs. We really think that they're the only ones standing against up against the trans people. And again, it just goes to reframe how this whole movement has started to focus on, the whole point of it is to focus only on trans people, and then, like the larger right-wing movement as a whole, using this sort of scapegoating of trans people in order to further their movements. So I know that this was a long conversation that just sort of used Rowling and Putin as a springboard for this, but I think it's ultimately important to discuss, because you'll get things like this, where we get tweets like this. I posted exactly basically what I was talking about on Twitter, and we get some people like this saying, Putin is an evil dictator, but he is right about one thing: men pretending to be girls should not be validated. So it just ultimately goes to, like, these people realize that Putin is an evil dictator. He is doing something harmful and wrong, but they're willing to give him a pass on this one issue because he's attacking the transes. And it's like, maybe have a little bit of self-awareness of, like, maybe if Putin is supporting these views against gender ideology, against transes, maybe you're the one that's actually perpetuating the harm too. Maybe if you're in agreement with the dictator, maybe the harm that you're doing is actually real harm, and that you're not actually helping anyone with your movement. And so I just think that, like, while this is ultimately a lesser discussion in terms of Ukraine, I think it's an important discussion in terms of how trans issues are framed in these sort of discussions, because I think it ultimately bolsters these movements. And I think this whole situation puts into very stark relief how gender critical TERF rhetoric is being weaponized by really darker movements as well. So I wanted to talk about that. Again, thank you for allowing me to do it in this sort of weird format that I'm doing here in the small little box on the side of the screen here. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about it today. So thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. That's all the fun YouTube things. If you're interested in my channel, I do talk about LGBTQ and social and political issues on this channel through nerddoms and geekdoms and pop culture stuff. Earlier today, I released a video about Turning Red, the Pixar movie, and how that was sort of wielded by fundamentalist Christian groups in order to sort of push back against, like, being able to show puberty. And also you're seeing stuff pop on my screen here, but go check out that video. I was very pleased with that video and how that video came out. But beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching me. Thank you so much for watching this channel. I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper, my friends.